Very, very warm welcome from me. Really, really nice to be here and launching this series of talks, series of 8 weeks that we're exploring the 4 myths of the spiritual life. I was just thinking, actually, it used to be 3 myths and another one emerged, which is a little pun because the 4th myth is called emergence. But anyway, I'm leaping ahead a little bit. So yes, we're going to be exploring these 4 myths of the spiritual life, 4 ways of approaching or ways of understanding our spiritual life, 4 ways of framing perhaps our practice, our experience of our practice. And these ways of framing practice will be part of our meditation life, perhaps part of how we approach our relationship with Buddhism, approach our relationship with ourselves as beings in the world. So they're quite having these frameworks are quite fundamental. So over the next eight weeks, including tonight. Following on from tonight, we'll be able to go into each of the myths in quite some depth and explore what each of the myths has to offer us as spiritual practitioners, as Buddhists. And today I want to give us an overview of, the talk's called What is a Myth? And why, what is a myth in this particular use of the word? Because I think a myth can mean quite a lot of different things. So how are we using this term myth? What is a myth? And myth has a lot of relationship with views. So we're looking at the world of views. Views are ways that we understand our relationship with the world, as well as myths. So I'm going to pay quite a lot of attention to views. There's a lot to say about views in the Buddhist tradition. It's a big teaching. It's a chewy teaching. There's lots to think about when we're thinking about views. So I'm going to explore what views are, what the Buddha had to say about views, and before we start to approach these framing of myth, this sort of I'd say what these 4 myths are is not an invention of how to live the spiritual life, but an observation of the way that different people experience their spiritual lives. And by articulating that observation, those observations, we get more clear about what we're doing. And clarity is really, really helpful and really, really important. So these 4 myths, I'll say what they are. They're not, you might think, oh great, myths, we're going to have some stories. So hopefully there will be some stories over the next 4 weeks. But these myths, we're not using the word myth in that way. It's not set of legends. These myths were described by the president of the London Buddhist Centre, actually, Subhuti. So he sort of noticed these ways of thinking about Buddhist life and has articulated them in this model. And the 4 myths are the myth of self-development or self-transcendence, more properly, self-transcendence. So the myth of self-transcendence, the myth of self-surrender, the myth of self-discovery, and then the final myth of emergence. So we've got self-transcendence, self-surrender, self-discovery, and emergence. So we've got these 4 ways of relating to our practice. So they're not stories, they're not legends, not myth in that way, but they are perhaps frameworks. We can think of them as symbolic frameworks for practice, symbolic frameworks for on our understanding of our spiritual lives. And perhaps these 4 approaches will be appropriate at different times to different temperaments at different stages in spiritual practice in our Buddhist lives. And no myth, this is the wonderful thing actually about having 4 myths, 4 frameworks, is because no myth can be perfect. No framework or story or approach can be perfect in describing Buddhist life and the Buddhist goal, we've got these four which can serve as supports and correctives to one another. So by having four myths, we're much more able to articulate something inarticulable by this kind of not over relying on one central myth. So hopefully that will become more clear as we explore. Because each myth has a very positive side, a kind of guiding side, a leading side. Subhuti calls it a front and a back. So most of what I'm going to say is articulations of what Subhuti's been teaching around this. A front and a back. So the front is the guiding side, very, very positive, inspired. The back will be where we're perhaps where there might be some dangers in over relying on one myth, perhaps some little dead ends or some restrictions. Yeah. So that's probably serves as an introduction. What I'd like to do, perhaps going on from an overview of these four myths, perhaps where we should start, it's pretty much right at the beginning of the Buddha's teaching life, actually. So we could just start there, start with views. Yeah. So I said at the beginning that we'll be exploring what views are, when the Buddha first taught, the first teaching that the Buddha gave after his enlightenment, he gave two teachings, and one was the Four Noble Truths. And part of the Four Noble Truths, I'm not going to go into all of this, but I just want to articulate it because of its fundamental importance in Buddhism. So part of the Four Noble Truths, or coming from the Four Noble Truths, have got this famous Buddhist formulation, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. Yeah, the Noble Eightfold Path. And the first limb of the Noble Eightfold Path relates to views, and it talks about perfect or right view, which is a very important Buddhist idea, right view. And as you can imagine, like this is, as it's one of his first teachings, and it's the first limb of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's fundamental to Buddhist understanding. Without some idea of what we mean by right view, we're going to, however well-meaningly, we're going to blunder around on the Buddhist path, or off the Buddhist path, most likely. So what is a view? Why do we even need to talk about views? Well, views are opinions. We've all got views on this or that. We've got views about how the government should be dealing with this pandemic, whichever country you're in. We've got views about how the government should be dealing with other things. We've got views about, mainly about what other people should be doing. But we've also got views about what we want from our lives. So views are opinions and underlying assumptions. And Subhuti's got a very comprehensive definition of what a view is. And he says a view is an explanation, an account, or a myth. So that's where we're going to be putting our emphasis. Yeah, so an explanation, an account, or a myth. And a view can be expressed or implied. A view can be formulated or felt. And a view can be conscious or unconscious. Yeah, so we might know what our views are, or we might not have an idea about our views. And many of our views, as we'll go on to see, are hidden from us. They're hidden from us for various reasons. And views come from all sorts of different places. We're under all sorts of influences, people that we know, our current culture. So views, our worldview, we probably might even think that we've got a nice, tidy, consistent worldview. It won't be. It will be contradictory. and it will be influenced by scientific ideas, it will be influenced by cultural ideas, religious ideas, and when I say influenced by, it might be in reaction to, or it might be in embracing of these things, psychological ideas, political ideas. So our views are taken from all sorts of places and usually picked up in a not very conscious way. So so views can be kind of minute little things about how we sort of run our day-to-day life, or much more fundamental things about how human beings exist in the world and what human beings should do. And views also views create our moral world as well. So there's a lot to do with morality tied up with views. So what are we going to do about it? Well, I think we need to explore it in a bit more depth. One of the things to say is it's not wrong. It's not wrong to have views. It's not like we've done anything wrong. And Buddhist teaching says that some views, well, in fact, one particular view, we're born with. So it's not that there's not this understanding that we're like these born as these spotless little creatures, and then the world in all of its evil influence comes and kind of inflicts all these views on us. Buddhism doesn't say that. Buddhism says we're born with an innate view, and then many views are acquired. So there's an innate self-view that we're born with, and that view is that we are fixed and separate selves operating in a world that doesn't, that we're not connected to in a deep way, that we're fixed and separate selves. And this is a fundamental delusion about our existence. Yeah, this is the fundamental delusion about our existence. And this delusion means that we crave things that shore up our identity, and that we push away things that challenge it. So this fundamental self-view, innate view we're born with, it's not like it's a sin or anything. It's just how we are sort of operate. It's how we see ourselves. And this idea of a self-view, it can go in two directions. So there's this idea that this Buddhist teaching that there are extreme views, and that the self-view creates these extreme views, that this self can either go in one way or another, and one way is eternalistic. So if I am a self, here I am, me, I've always been me, there's something very, very me about me, and it will always be thus. Even when I die, I might go to heaven, or I might be reborn as me, but like a bit different, who I probably won't remember that I was me previously, but it will definitely be me. Yeah, so this me is eternalistic, or I might also perhaps unite with something bigger. Yeah, so there's an idea that it's me, but I might unite, become one with something bigger. So that would be an eternalistic response to a fixed self-view. And a nihilistic response is that probably something like, it would probably go with the idea that matter creates consciousness. I'm only me from a certain, I don't know when you start being you, maybe just before you're born, or just after you're born or something. And when I die, there'll be nothing. And the only thing that's real is the current experience. Yeah, the only thing that's real. There's nothing outside of my current experience. There's nothing that I can't see or understand with my viewpoint, and that means that that's a very alarming view, I guess, as well, because what that tends towards is a kind of over-reliance on direct experience, or also despair, over-reliance on pleasurable experience, for instance, and also can get into despair and a lack of meaning. So eternalists often seem to be much the happier bunch, but we can say that both of those views are fraught with danger, mainly because they're not true. Yeah, they're both as impossible as one another. And then acquired views. This is the fun bit. I was talking about this over dinner just before this talk. So acquired views are views that are shaped by the conditions of this current life. So our fundamental self-view then forms into this very, very complex set of personality traits and beliefs informed by our families, our culture, our experience in life. And some of them we might think of that we've sort of decided to take them on, but many of those views will be invisible, especially if they're unquestioned within our own culture. So, for instance, if you're born into a culture where everybody believes in God, and you never even encountered someone who doesn't believe in God, you wouldn't even know that was an option that to decide whether there was a God or not. So very much each era and each culture has its prevailing views, and often we don't think to question them at all. The prevailing view will usually be unquestioned and unchallenged, and very, very, very hard to notice. I think particularly our culture now, scientific materialism would say, or science would say, that it's not a view. To believe in nothing is not a view. That it's not a belief to believe in nothing. Like people will say, "Oh, I don't really have any beliefs," but even that is a set of beliefs. So some of the views that we were talking about in our community at dinner were so a belief in an eternal soul, as I just mentioned, and that might be like a belief in a final reckoning, a belief that there is nothing after death, a belief in a hereditary hierarchy, so where you're born in a place in the world, and that's either inferior or superior to others for different reasons. And that leads me to think about racial superiority or inferiority. That's a view. What else did we have? We had views. Oh yes, that if I have enough money, everything will be all right. If I find the right relationship, all my personal problems will be solved. Also, if I was a proper Buddhist, I would go away up in a mountain and just meditate. That's a view about Buddhism. Another view about Buddhism is if I get ordained, all my problems will be solved. Obviously, that's happened to me, but it doesn't happen to everybody. Views like I'm special. I have quite a good view that I like being right. I find it very difficult to discover occasions when I'm not right. So that definitely challenges my views about myself. Life has to be such and such a way for it to have any meaning. So it might be that I have to have the right career. I have to find my soul's calling. I have to find my true self. Those are views as well. Perhaps, and I was trying to, sometimes easier to think of one's own views, but views perhaps not so fashionable, like if I do my duty, everything will be all right. Duty is not a particularly fashionable view. If I express myself, everything will be all right. So those are some of the kinds of views. So some will be, there's some other ones we were talking about. Views that if you're a Buddhist, you couldn't vote for Conservative Party, for instance. So some people definitely have that view that you can't be a Buddhist and a Tory. Maybe there's some Buddhist Tories out there. The views that if we overthrow the patriarchy, everything will be all right. Now, how do we know these are views and not just really, really good opinions? Well, the way to notice is if you get annoyed or indignant or righteously angry if your views or when your views are challenged. Yeah. So that's sometimes we can think that we don't even have views until something or someone usually comes along and upsets us. Sabajamati and I have a very interesting practice group where we're discussing these kinds of reactions, and often very, very interesting and deeply held views are revealed. If you next time you feel that you're affronted or you feel that indignation, and particularly hard to recognize as an opportunity for Buddhist practice is a feeling of righteous indignation. So when you're taking the moral high ground, it's hard to spot because you think that you're right, and it might be that you are. So if you see some injustice or something that's quite painful, we can quite quickly move from a sense of empathy or a more straightforward sadness or something like that, a more direct response to a whole cluster of views, mental proliferation around that event. It shouldn't be this, it shouldn't be this, it should be like this. So if we think things should be one way and they're not, it usually means that something quite deep in us has been challenged, our worldview has been challenged. And when our worldview has been challenged, we experience a deep sense of threat, a possibly sort of unrecognizable, sort of lurking sense of threat about our existence. One nice thing about this, and particularly our practice group, is bringing a sense of humour to that, and some of those seemingly trivial little things about, I don't know, how people behave at the dinner table, for instance, or other people's manners or expectations of us, can cause huge affront, and it's usually really very funny. Once you start examining it, we can start really enjoying the preposterousness of our views. Like how did we really expect this person to solve all our problems or agree to us or whatever. So that's also just a little reminder that sense of humour is really important in the Dharma life. Yeah, so I think that's quite that sort of as a side point, that bringing a sense of humour to our habits of mind, to our sort of folly in meditation or in our general practice, can be very, very helpful, and without it, it all becomes a bit tricky and a bit hard work. So that's a special teaching. Bring humour to your practice. Laugh at yourself, especially if you're affronted by something that somebody else is doing. Yeah, I'm just going to pause and have a drink. Yeah, so views are really charged. They're not rationally acquired opinions where we've weighed up one thing or another. They're charged, and they're much, much more to do with emotion than reason. We're much, much more emotionally motivated. This is what our teacher Sangharakshita has really brought out, that we're much more emotionally motivated than rationally motivated, however sophisticated we appear, however sort of rationally we present ourselves. And it's just very interesting that even our most humane values and notions can be appropriated by ego clinging. So it doesn't mean that we should, by doing this, it doesn't mean that we should stop caring about certain things, but it's when we notice that there's a certain investment about our own existence in whatever causes we align ourselves with, for instance, that we notice that there's something more at threat, or more being challenged than a value, but something much more personally held. Yeah. So perhaps talking like this, for those of you who've read any of the Dhammapada, which is this beautiful set of pithy Buddhist sayings, very, very old, one of the oldest collections of teachings from the Buddha. The first lines are, and I decided that I could remember it. Something like, everything is preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. Think or act with a pure mind, think or act with an impure mind, and suffering will follow, even as the wheel follows the hoof of the ox that draws it. And then think of experience is, oh gosh, I've just said it. Produce. What did I say? It's preceded by mind, led by mind, produced by mind. It's good that I've got a prompt in the sidelines. Experiences are led by mind, produced by mind, preceded by mind. Think or act with a pure mind, and joy will follow as a shadow that never departs. So yeah, I made a bit of a hash of saying that, but on a superficial reading, we might not understand quite how deep that is. Yeah, it's a lovely poetic image, but we might not understand how deeply our experiences are preceded, led, and produced by mind, and that word mind is more than just the intellect. So we're talking about much more than in the intellect. We're talking about our whole identity, our emotional life, and this root, precious, cherished view about ourselves. So one more thing to say about views. So Buddhism, we talk about right view and we talk about wrong view, which sounds incredibly clumsy, doesn't it? It sounds very like perhaps moralistic and oversimplified and perhaps reductive. So I just want to say a little bit about those two things, and then hopefully that will lead us into where we're going, which is talking about what is myth in this instance. So right view. so the word for view is ditti, samaditthi or drishti. And sometimes right view is translated in different ways, like perfect view, or whole even, sense of perfection or whole. And also our teacher Sangharajita talks about view as being vision, which is much more sort of exciting and a much more enticing way of thinking about view. So he talks about perfect vision. But for the moment I'm going to talk about right view. Actually, I learned this really nice thing that sama is this word meaning right or perfect or whole. It's got the same root as the word consummate. So the summa bit in consummate, which means whole or complete. It's the same root as sama. So we can have this sense that right view is whole, it's complete, and Subhuti talks about it as being an attention that's unbiased. It takes in the whole. So in the whole dizzying sort of array of data that's available, the kind of attention that leads to right view takes out biases and attends to everything. It attends to pleasant, painful and neutral sensation. It doesn't ignore what it doesn't like and latch onto what it does like. So wise attention leads to right view, this sense of wholeness. And this attention, this sense, this vision that can take in everything with equanimity, can understand conditionality, so it can understand the deeply conditioned nature of us and the world in relation to the world. So we start to move away from this dualistic sense of me operating in the world as a separate agent. So right view, rather than being I'm right and you're wrong, I've got right view, you've got wrong view. It's nothing like that. Right view is an attention that can take in everything without bias, and then by that can see very, very deeply into the nature of experience. And wrong view is one-sided, it's polluted by biases, and it leads to suffering. That's the main problem with wrong view. It leads to suffering for me, and it leads to suffering for others. So if I have a view that if I have the view that I've got to find the perfect relationship, and this person has got to be perfect, they've got to correct all my faults, they've got to provide me with all these different things, maybe the right kind of house, it's going to be very, very difficult to find that person. I'm probably going to suffer a lot of heartbreak, for instance, and also that person's under an awful lot of pressure to be perfect. So that's a sort of personal example of a wrong view. It doesn't take in, wrong views don't take in other people's individuality, and they don't take in this sense of wholeness, which I really like of this description of right view. Yeah. In later Buddhist tradition, the Buddha talked about, there's a sutta where he's talking about right and wrong views in particular, and he gives 64 examples of wrong views, and most of them are in relation to the spiritual life. So this is where we start to understand why it's so important to orientate our vision properly as well as we can as we embark on our Buddhist journey. Yes, so the Buddha, I don't know this sutta very well, but the Buddha said that most out of these 64 wrong views elucidated here, most of them, a good majority of them were to do with wrong views about spiritual experience. So wrong view will persist right throughout spiritual life, even at very deep levels, even when we're practicing a lot. It's very easy to appropriate spiritual experience to our predisposed view of the world. So, for instance, it might be that deep in meditation, one has a very strong experience of something else coming through one. Yeah, something else coming through one. It might even have words to say. It might offer images, and it's very easy then to say, yes, I had an experience of God. But Buddhism wouldn't say that. Buddhism would say, it was as though something was coming through me. It was as though this happened. But without trying to nail down exactly what it was, because then by doing that, then you're starting to create a metaphysical reality, which is never going to be accurate. So the more we're trying to move away from metaphysics, and not only is it not going to be accurate, but it prevents a deeper experience. So by holding loose to the label of that experience, you can then go further into that experience. So right view is in accordance with reality, and what right view leads us to is no view. So it's said that a Buddha has no view, which is quite that's quite a strong thought, to have no view. I can't really imagine it. I find it very hard to imagine. And perhaps you could just think about how attached you might be to your views. Try and think what that might be, to not have any preconception, to not have any bias, and to be free in that way. So I think it offers the vision of no view, hard as it is to comprehend, offers freedom. But I think for most of us, when our views are challenged, it's scary. So it's quite a frightening prospect. And one also thing to say about no view, it's not that the Buddha's not able to think or not able to discern. I was thinking about this, and I thought, so someone who can actually think without bias, without preconceptions, they're the only person. I think only the Buddha can think actually properly. We think we're thinking, but we're just sort of going around little tracks that we're used to going around, and then pick up someone else's track and kind of go around that. And, we think we're thinking, but thinking clearly is very, very difficult, and probably only a Buddha can think in a pure way. That's my own thoughts. So I'm not sure. I'm not completely sure about that, but yes. And another part of the Dhammapada, they talk about the bleary half-light of opinion, which I think is such a good metaphor for. Sometimes it just feels like we're supposed to have opinions on all of these different things, but actually they reduce. Having opinions reduces our vision, reduces our ability to be creative, I suppose. So yes, wrong views are everywhere. Right view is hard to discern, and very, very profound. So this is why we need to be really conscious about what our frameworks are, what our what narratives we bring to the spiritual life, which is why these 4 myths are really helpful. I heard Mary Beard, who's a classical historian, she was talking about myth, and she gave a definition of myth, which is, I think, semi-useful for us, that what she said was it's an economical way of thinking about the world, which is good, an economical way of thinking about the world. And a myth is not a thing, but a way of thinking about the world. So we can inhabit a myth as a way to question the world, as a way to think about the world, to use it to question rather than to close down or to metaphysicize or to be dogmatic about. So if we use these 4 myths, or one or other of them at a time, we use them in this way, as a way of thinking about the world, as a way of helping us develop. And each myth has a front and a back, as Subhuti says. So the strengths of each myth are spiritual truths, and they will take us very, very far. Yeah, and the backs are the dangers, as I said earlier. And the dangers are when we become too literal about a myth, any particular myth. And the dangers are a sense of an incomplete, perhaps, framework. And each myth has a tendency to either nihilism or eternalism. And hopefully over the next few weeks, the other teachers are going to really take you into the juiciness of each of these myths. They've been articulated by different parts of the Buddhist tradition, so there's lots of teachings in there. I'm just going to give a quick overview. Quick overview of the 4 myths. So the myth of self-transcendence. This is a way of thinking about growth, a way that we might think about evolution. And this myth is a strong myth for the Triratna Buddhist community. Our teacher, Bhante Sangharajita, really thought about use the metaphor of human evolution, that we can, by practicing, we can transcend and keep transcending. So it's a myth about growth. And early Buddhist tradition is full of this. So the word striving is used in a lot of the early suttas. And the Buddha talks about striving. And in fact, the Buddha's own spiritual life is sort of characterized by effort and striving, practicing ethics, guarding the mind, the 4 right efforts, overcoming craving, all sort of takes discipline and effort. And I think perhaps there's always a secular kind of version of each of these myths. So self-transcendence can be a bit like self-development. So like you become a bigger, better person, a bigger, better version of yourself. So, I used to be like this, but now I'm like this. I did all these things and now I'm like this and I can do this. That's not really me, but but that's a strong myth, isn't it, for human growth? Not always harmful, but sometimes limited. And the problem is, you just stay attached to yourself as sort of constantly renewing. The myth of self-surrender. This perhaps a little bit less familiar to us, maybe. In the Buddha's life, the example that I can think of is when he was newly enlightened. He was looking for something to devote himself to. So self-surrender has this flavour of devotion, reverence, of looking up to perhaps something out there. And the Buddha realised that even an enlightened mind wanted to do this, and this beautiful thing that sutta he describes, that he could revere and rely upon the Dharma, so the truth as he had realised it. So it's like the Buddha's whole life in this way was building up to this surrender to the truths of reality. And perhaps in your own experience, maybe before practicing or just in everyday experience. I was trying to think of examples of self-surrender. And actually, I think hedonism, some hedonistic experiences like drug taking, also falling in love is a strong experience of self-surrender. And also maybe that feeling of being in a crowd at a music concert, letting something else, something that's out there, overtake who we are. So any experiences that you've had, you might have experienced some of those things. It's religiously, it's more to do with, it's more obvious in theistic traditions, like the spirit of God coming through one. Then the myth of self-discovery. So maybe this is perhaps where we make efforts to analyse our experience and look for what is experience, what is it made of. And the Buddha, and his final exclamation of his enlightenment talked, he said, "House builder, you have now been seen." And he talks about you'll never build your rafters again. So he's seen through the construct of self-creation. He's seen through it. He's seen it as illusory. So self-discovery might lead to something like that, a sort of analysis and exploration through different aspects of our experience. What is going on, and dropping our assumptions around it. And it might be, I'm not completely sure about this, but it might be around in a secular way. It might be around like looking for our true selves, or sort of something, searching within for something authentic. Then the final myth is the myth of emergence, and it's very related to self-discovery. It's a sense of looking within, but perhaps in a more receptive way, allowing something to grow. I think of emergence as being a growth metaphor as well. Sort of, we get out of the way to let something within flower. Flower is a beautiful metaphor for emergence, and I think yes, also this idea in the world. I often feel like on Instagram and adverts that I get when I'm on the internet often kind of encapsulate sort of some of these myths, actually, like looking for your true self. I think that is part of the myth of self-discovery, but I think it's also part of emergence, like looking for your soul's actual place in the world, or like for your real voice to come out, or something like that. And I'm not sort of criticizing those, but they're helpful, but they're limited. They're not dharmically true yet. Emergence would be when the Buddha had a vision of humanity. When he was newly awakened, he saw humanity as a lake of lotuses. Some were rooted in the mud. They were all rooted in the mud, but some were quite low in the water. Others were moving up. Others were above the water, and others still more advanced, flowering, blossoming. And maybe that's a metaphor for emergence, that there's something within that needs to be expressed, that needs to be allowed to happen. So a sense of a receptive awareness of that allows it to happen. Yeah, so that's a little summary of those 4 myths. And that's perfect timing. It brings us to 8 o'clock. Yeah, so I just want to encapsulate what I've just said. So we've gone on a journey from looking at views and opinions and how we view ourselves in the world. The Buddhist view that by cultivating right view or perfect vision even, we can come closer to reality, which is the final goal is no view at all. That's what a Buddha would have. And that these three myths, what they're doing is actually articulating ways in which we can become closer to the Buddha, closer to being an enlightened being. So that's why we have these three myths, and each of them allows us to do that in different ways. But we do need all four, otherwise our practice becomes maybe over literal in one way or unbalanced in another. The four don't need to be balanced in equal parts, but each myth offers a support and a strengthening to the other myths, as we will see over the next few weeks. So I really hope you can come and enjoy these four myths explored over the next 7 weeks. I think it'll be really, really interesting.